only when the free Coloureds denounced them. It was therefore in an atmosphere of profound ignorance that the colonial office, under the influence of James Stephen Jr., set about in the 1820s to discover what the grievances of the free Coloureds were. When the British government became interested in the free Coloureds, it did not railroad the local authorities into immediate action. The judicial commissioners who visited so many of the British islands had their terms of reference extended specifically to include an investigation of the grievances of the free Coloureds in Trinidad. Governor Woodford was given a chance to explain himself. James Stevens Jr. was asked to review the recommendations of the Judicial Commissioners. All of this happened because of the complexity of the free Coloureds' claim in Trinidad. Their claims to civil equality was based on a Spanish cedula which seemed to couple land grants and a period of residence with the rights of full citizenship. One question which the metropolitan government had to sort out was whether free Coloureds who had not received land grants were entitled under the cedula to civil equality. These difficulties delayed a decision by the British government. Hence, the irony that in a crown colony where the British government had power to act directly, a 5-year lag occurred between the presentation of the main petition and the decisive order in council in 1828. In view of the report of the Judicial Commissioner and James Stevens Jr., it seemed correct to say that in imposing civil equality in 1829, the British government was restoring an old right rather than establishing a new privilege. That is, the British government seemed to have agreed that the Cedula of 1783 did establish civil equality. Of course, in selling the idea of civil equality using Trinidad as a model, the British government sought to get the other islands to legislate free Coloureds equality as a new principle, and in Trinidad itself in subsequent years. The Order in Council of 1829 was apparently celebrated as the beginning of a new principle rather than the restoration of an old right. All right, and that concludes my reading from these two books which I regularly use. All right, but tonight I want to introduce a little bit of information that I discovered while doing some important research on the history of the Spiritual Baptist and the Shouter Baptist history in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this history sort of corroborates with some of the history that I have been presenting on this particular program. It gives a history of the early arrival of some Africans from South America. All right, I don't want to say too much, but I'm going to read exactly what the book stated. This, by the way, is a booklet that was accompanied with a recording of Spiritual Baptist music of Trinidad, recorded in Trinidad by Stephen D. Glazier. And in this booklet, it gave a brief history of Trinidad, explaining where the people who were here and where they came from. All right, in the third paragraph in this booklet, it reads, "The number of slaves increased under the British rule. However, a majority of Trinidad's blacks migrated from other West Indian islands after emancipation. There were also immigrants from the Azores, Madeira, and parts of Europe and the United States during the 1800s. American immigrants were predominantly blacks from the southern side tracts of land. American immigrants were predominantly blacks from the southern states. The British colonial government of Trinidad laid aside tracts of land for American slaves who fought against the United States in the War of 1812. Settlers on these tracts of land, known as the company villages, had played an important part in the religious history of Trinidad. Between 1845 and 1917, indentured laborers from China and India came to Trinidad. Chinese laborers had a limited influence as many of their numbers returned home after completing their period of indenture. Indian laborers, on the other hand, often remained on the island as wage earners. Many bought land and settled permanently. All right, now, the reason I read this is because it also speaks of lessons that we have given so far, explaining that many of the indentured came from different parts of Europe, the Azores, Madeira, China, and other places, as well as many of the Africans that were brought to Trinidad were in fact brought from the southern part of the United States. All right, so basically with that ends my program for this week, and my words of admonition as I give each week is: you do good for yourself. You do bad for yourself. And I would remind everyone to look forward to the practical teachings that we are going to be introducing soon. Establishing morning Iba is one part of it, Ori appeasement, as well as the spiritual cleansing rituals, as well as actionable awareness. All right? Also, remember to like, share, and comment. And for persons who are interested in learning more, we also have the classes where we offer the fundamentals of Ifa. All right, thank you for joining me, and Odabo.